Him use the electrification of the blood and the magnetic pulsar on the various lymph nodes and lymph areas of the body. Well, this little boy was a trooper, and what happened, he truly became cancer-free. Now I want to explain what occurred with the politics of health. The mother decided, because the child had been cancer-free and is one of the only children that was in this group of all these children that had leukemia, and he is cancer-free, where most of the other children going through the traditional medicine had died. She, as the mother, decided, my child is doing very well on the natural program, has been cancer-free for 6 months. I would like to not do the traditional allopathic medicine, chemotherapy and radiation. Well, what ended up happening is the state came to her and told her that if she does not continue chemotherapy and what all of the physicians want to do to this child, that they will take the child away from the mother. Now, she was petrified and said, how can you do this to me? I'm the mother. I want to do what's right for my child. My child is doing very well on this natural program, and when you have to give him a spinal tap every 3 months and chemotherapy and radiation, that's not correct. You're hurting my child, and I don't want that. Well, the state said, you do not have jurisdiction over your child. We have jurisdiction over your child, and you will do this or we will take your child away. So she had to make the decision. Does she stay with the traditional therapy until the state releases her child, or does she run away and move to another country? And I told her, look, we can treat the child and make sure that the protocols work and continue to work, and you don't want to lose your child, so you do what the state tells you. Unless you want to fight, unless you want to get an attorney and fight for your rights. Well, for her, which fight is she going to do? The fight for a legal custody or the fight to keep her child healthy? And she chose to keep her child healthy, so she continued the allopathic program along with the natural protocols from naturopathic medicine and the Beck protocols. So he's now 6 years old, doing very well. The state has finally released him.
Many, many times people have said to me, well, if there were evidence for it, it would be published. And of course what they mean is published in the acceptable medical literature. But what they don't recognize is that the medical literature only publishes that kind of material which is consistent with its philosophy. So if something is submitted which is too far out of their way of belief, no matter how good it is, it will not be published. And this is true not just in medicine, it happens in other fields too. Well, there's a particularly well-known television and radio, I guess, medical doctor who does a program. And I've heard him sometimes say, well, I've looked into that, and I can find nothing in literature to support da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, maybe he did look into it, and he probably didn't find anything to support it, but then which literature did he look in? If it's the orthodox medical literature, because it's not there, doesn't mean it isn't true. And that's most unfortunate.
I became involved in the health issue mainly because of a close friend of mine. Dr. John Richardson was an MD who practiced general medicine up in the San Francisco area. And one day he told me that he was having trouble with the medical authorities because he was using a substance in the treatment of cancer which was not approved by the AMA or the FDA in this case. And even though he was having marvelous results with it, better results than anything he had ever tried in his practice, they had told him in effect, stop using it or you're going to lose your license. And he had a terrible dilemma because his Hippocratic oath was to save lives. That was his first obligation. And to preserve his license seemed to be secondary to him. He was a very principled man. So I said to John, I said, well, look, my business is communication, so let me dig into this, give me your papers, give me your notes, and educate me a little bit, and I'll produce a little documentary film, and we'll explain the truth, and then the opposition will go away when they understand what the truth really is. Well, that's how naive I really was. I had no idea how much voltage was in the wire I was about to grab. In this field in particular, the science of cancer therapy wasn't nearly as complicated as the politics of cancer therapy. It wasn't an issue of whether something was effective. It didn't matter whether it worked. It didn't matter whether you were saving lives. The important thing was it approved. Did it go through the political process? And then you find out that the political process is dependent largely upon the economic process. Who's involved? Who's making a buck on this thing? Who is in control of the industry? And wow, I had no idea what I was getting into. I can speak of the American medical profession. It was captured. It was totally captured in 1910 by the pharmaceutical industry. From that point forward, the doctors of America were trained in how to prescribe drugs. Who was paying the bill? The pharmaceutical companies. And so therefore the curricula of the great medical centers where the doctors get their medical training has always been skewed in the direction of drugs and drug therapy. Prior to 1910, the condition of medical excellence, if you want to call it that, medical professionalism in the United States was at a very low level. In those days, it would be possible to get a medical diploma by mail. And just about anybody who really wanted to could hang out the shingle and say, I'm a doctor, and they could treat people. And there was a lot of quackery out there. I might say parenthetically, however, there's a lot of quackery out there today, and some of them have the MD degrees, but nevertheless, let's just take it straight. You know, there was quackery, and this is certainly not anything to be defended. There was a low level of medical knowledge. So everyone knew this, or a lot of people knew it in Congress anyway, and there was a lot of pressure, political pressure for medical reform in America. And, but nobody wanted to fund it. I mean, medical reform, whatever that means, you know that somehow it means money. If you're going to reform something, you've got to finance the reform. Well, it just so happened that the people who were most heavily invested in the pharmaceutical industry, people like the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, had tax-exempt foundations that were practicing what I call in my book, efficiency in philanthropy. It's not really what I call it. I borrowed that phrase from one of the original designers of philanthropy in those days. His name was Ivy Lee, and then his trade was picked up by a fellow by the name of Fred Gates. And these people were like public relations experts, and they were hired by the tycoons of the period, like Carnegie and George Pillsbury and John D. Rockefeller, to improve their public images. And so people like Ivy Lee and Fred Gates came up with what they called efficiency in philanthropy. And their formula was, all right, here's what you do. You give away large amounts of money. You've got plenty of that. So, you know, if you give away $1 million or $2 million, you hardly notice it. But to the average person, it's a huge donation. So you get a lot of publicity on being a great philanthropist. But don't just give it away with no strings attached to it. Give it away in a certain fashion so that it brings money back to you. And that's what the efficiency formula was all about. And what they would normally do, I'm digressing for a moment here, but it's interesting, I think, this part of the history. They would this was the origin of the matching funds formula. They used to just give away the money, but then Fred Gates said, no, don't just give it away. Give away half of it. Get the community involved. Tell them that you will match dollar for dollar. Every dollar that they can raise from the community, you will put $1 in. Now that way, you still get your name on the top of the library door or the hospital door. It's still your project, and you get all the publicity for it, but you only pay half as much. Not only that, you get the community involved, and they're out there ringing doorbells and doing mailings, and everybody feels that they're part of your project, and they feel that they're your partner, and they have this great feeling of camaraderie with you, and on and on and on. So this was it's a business, you see. Raising money is a business. And this all originated in those days. And so the formula for efficiency in philanthropy was applied to taking over the medical schools. All they had to do was to finance a great study to show how bad